Hey guys, my name is Ryan, and I'm here to do a very basic crash course in mixing. Um, what is mixing? A lot of people don't know what that is. So mixing is the process of taking audio that you've recorded and using tools like reverb and some other stuff like that you use in a software like Logic or Reaper, or in this case, Cakewalk Sonar. Um, and basically, you go through and you process the audio and you manipulate it to make certain aspects of it come out and sound better. So you can get a cleaner sound, and you can also add other effects to make the sound different, like if you wanted to make your guitar sound like a spaceship sound or something like that, like a that kind of effect. And then you can do that in mixing. So that's kind of generally what mixing is. Yeah. So with that out of the way, why am I doing this? Well, I myself am very little experience with mixing, and uh, I have a project where my goal was to research mixing and research techniques and ultimately educate myself, and then to take what I have learned and teach it to people and to show them different ways. You maybe help some people, understand a little bit about mixing and what goes into it. Um, like I said, I am not an expert, don't claim to be an expert whatsoever in this. So if the information is, not the best, that's why. But I do the best I can, and with the research that I've done, you know. So yeah. So I have a track here that I recorded. Um, and yeah, let's get into it. All right, so before we get into the, kind of the mixing portion of the video, I kind of wanted to go over kind of the recording process and talk about that a little bit. So recording kind of dictates like what you'll do with the mixing. So if you have a good recording, you don't really have to do too much in the mixing. I mean, you might want to do some stuff like, like a little bit of things like, we'll get this later on, but like equalization, maybe something like that, or, just very small detail things like maybe for the drums, just like a little bit of compressing or something like that. But I'll get to that later on again. But if you have good recording, you don't really need to tweak the recording too much. You really want to keep it as is especially for like vocals and whatnot. You really want to keep it the raw recording just to get that raw emotion, because that's for the most part what you want. You wouldn't really want the recording to speak for itself. So some things to really help with your recording is to make sure that there are no background noises. Um, so some things to keep in mind are like for example, amps. They can have a lot of feedback or like buzzing. That sometimes you can't always control that, but just being conscious of that in general. Another thing I would say is like air conditioning, stuff like that. If you can turn off like any air conditioning, obviously, if you can't, um, but just keep in mind of that, you know, because anything that the mics pick up, you know, it'll kind of show up in, you know, it'll show up in the recording. And, you know, if there's like a fan or something in the background or somebody talking, you know, it's gonna kind of ruin it, you know, and you're gonna, it's gonna be really hard to take that out in post. So you gotta make sure that you're conscious of that. And another thing is, you know, knowing when to use which mics and like how certain mics are used. So, for example, here I have an SM57, and this is kind of general purpose mic. It's a dynamic mic, which means it first of all it has direct sound. So like the kind of the cone of like where the sound, you know, kind of comes in is like right here. You can see that. So there's this, so if there's anything like right here, it's not gonna pick that up. It's not gonna, because it's really for just, you know, getting kind of just direct sound. And the reason why it's called dynamic mic is because um, it doesn't require any like any power to operate. Um, you can just plug it in and it's ready to go. They're very durable. They're good for basically anything, except for obviously if you don't have it, you know, it'll kind of suffice. But for bass drums, you generally want a mic that's made specifically for capturing those really low end, and it's really durable for, you know, for that kind of stuff. But like in general, this thing will capture anything. You know, it'll capture vocals, it'll capture guitar, it'll capture bass. When you're doing the recording, you really want to make sure that it's as close to the sound source as possible, because the volume really falls. You know, the volume really falls short the further you get away from it. Like even from this far away, it starts to get quiet. You have to really get right next to it. As you can tell, as I'm speaking into it, you can hear me a lot more. But the further I get, the less you can hear me. Um, and obviously, if I go like this, you know, you can't really hear me, but I'm right next to it. So that's kind of what it is. It's very, like I said, it's very durable. You know, you could really push it if you want to. Obviously, don't do anything crazy, like, you know, but yeah, in general, that's kind of what those are for, and they're very useful. They're not very good for getting reverb though, because they are, again, like they're really good for that like close-up kind of noise. So that would become for what this is for. These are good. This is a condenser mic, and the difference between this and this is that this, like I said, doesn't take any power, but this requires additional current to run through it. So on your interface, there'll be a switch, more than likely for um, upping the voltage, and it takes 48 volts to operate, um, because it is a lot more sensitive. So it takes that extra power to really, you know, capture all the sound that it captures. And what the condenser mic allows you to do is to really get good details in a recording. So like if you want, you know, to get a good like room sound, you know, for like drums, for example, a lot of people will, in addition to these mics, which will have mic'd around like, you know, the snare, the toms, and whatnot, they'll have these condenser mics placed overhead for just kind of like the general whole sound of the whole instrument, because they're very good for capturing kind of that whole sound. You know, they're very sensitive, so you don't have to place them really close. And in fact, if you place them really close to a loud sound source, it'll actually damage the mic more often than not. I mean, they do have there's some situations where you can do louder sounds. So, for example, if you wanted to do like loud vocals, You could do it. I don't recommend it. And if you do it, I would recommend getting a pop filter because when you do those loud vocals, more often than not, you're gonna have spit coming through, and any moisture going into these mics is very bad for you. You don't want any moisture near this. You want to make sure that they stay dry as possible. Um, so this pop filters will it's like a shield for the mic. And it'll allow any spit, and it'll allow it to make sure that any um, unexpected loud noises to kind of soften. It'll soften the dynamics more, so it'll control it a little bit more. Um, and yeah, that's if you wanted to do loud vocals and you wanted that detail from the condenser mic, that's what you would do, is you would put a pop filter on there. But in general, you usually want to use these for just kind of like, you know, kind of just like the reverb of the room, just kind of get the sound. Um, or if you wanted to do like very intricate, detailed, like soft vocals, that's what you'd want them to do. Um, that's kind of what I personally like it for, is for, you know, when you kind of are in like, that soft vocals, it really helps capture that detail. And then if you wanted to do, like I use this SM57 when I get louder in the recording, as you'll hear, I definitely speak into this more, or I sing into this more because, like I said, it's not best for the mic to scream into it. Um, so that's kind of like different kind of mics. It's kind of like, the kind of the mics you run into, and condenser mics are definitely going to run you more money wise. This one I believe that I have, it's about around $200. So, if you can't afford that, an SM57, which these are about running about like $100 or so. Um, Definitely more affordable, and they like I said, like, if you use them right, they'll do just as good. Ish, Um, Another thing that's important is like how you set up your mics. Like I said, you want this right next to whatever sound source, and to kind of, if you wanted to get a stereo image, you definitely want kind of want multiple mics going through, especially if you have like a drum kit. You want mics on each area to get each source of like the sound, especially if you only have these, so you want multiple mics. If you're doing it through an amp and you don't have a condenser mic, it's kind of hard to get, a kind of a stereo sound. You kind of have to like add more of that reverb and like stereo in post, with like surround sound and stuff like that. Um, but yeah, if you do have condenser mics, you can kind of set them around the amp to kind of get a nice fuller stereo sound instead of just like, a mono sound, which is just like one sound source. You know, yeah. Let's see. Some other things I would say is be conscious of like the size of the room, If you're going for a bigger sound, you're gonna have to add that in post, because if you don't have access to a large room, you're not going to be able to get that same reverb if you're in a smaller room. Um, and, make sure the place you're recording in doesn't have, you know, thin walls or anything like that. You want to make sure that any outside noises don't interfere. You want to make sure you're in a place where there's no chance of just like a random fire truck or something like that. I mean, obviously, most places, if you're in a building, you can't really control that, but like, you want to make sure that like you're in a place where it's very quiet, and definitely away from people. You want to make sure any people in there are quiet, because that'll interfere with the recording. And yeah, that's kind of general recording tips to make sure you get a good sound. One thing before we actually get into the mixing I wanted to mention is binaural recording. So basically what this technique is that it's instead of the listener listening from the point of view of the instrument, the listener is listening from the point of view of themselves, if that makes sense. They're listening or they're listening as if they were there, if that makes sense. And so how this is done is that they have, so imagine my head is like the dummy head, and around me are all these instruments, and the dummy head will have microphones placed on, where, the ears would be. And so the microphones kind of capture how a listener would listen if they were actually there in the recording room. And it really captures a nice natural surround sound. And it's really effective if you have like a nice big room too. It's like, it just gives the listener like the feeling just of like being in a big empty just wall of sound. It really immerses the listener into something like that. And I think that's really fascinating. One of the people who implements this kind of technique, uh, he is a audio engineer who worked for Hosier, who recorded for Hosier. And Andrew Sheps talks about this. He's a producer who has worked with Hosier, and he talks about, and he's worked with that kind of stuff, and he kind of implements that technique as well. Um, and just talks about how like they used it for one of the Hosier is. For those who don't know what Hosier is a band, kind of these Irish band or like an Irish. It's an Irish dude who kind of does blues, folky kind of stuff like that. Very emotional, raw stuff. So as you can imagine, in an emotional, just raw song, it's kind of nice to have like that kind of point of the view of the listener, so the listener's just kind of getting that raw emotion in their face, or and to better capture that, they use that binaural recording technique, and Andrew Sheps talks about this in a masterclass, and he just talks about how like the difference between that and just like record if they had just recorded the just like how they would normally record it, it would kind of just draw away from what the song really is trying to capture. So binaural recording is just a really effective way to really get a nice, really good natural surround sound, to get a nice, just real powerful emotion to the song. And and if you listen to the song, it just sounds amazing. Um, yeah, definitely check out Andrew Chips. He's a very good producer. Um, yeah. Now let's get into the mix, but I just kind of wanted to mention that. Alright, so let's go. Now that we've gone over recording, let's go over exactly what. Okay, I don't know why it's doing that. Let's go over the mixing part. So, what I want to do first is kind of show the bass. So, kind of want to go over this bass first, actually. So let me solo this. So let me just give a little listen here. Alright, so let me just kind of show what's going on. So, let's see, what do I want to go over through? Alright, so, first, let's go over the boost. Alright, so, the boost, obviously, kind of, in its name, it boosts the sound of the recording. So it'll take what the input is, like the audio that's in there, and it'll control the volume in the input, and then you can also control the volume of the output. It's kind of it. Just kind of controls the volume, and you can add limiters, make sure that because if you can play it, you can see the audio, so you can kind of control the limiter so that it doesn't, go over a certain limit you don't want, in case it clips or anything like that. You can have reduction and with all of that. So yeah, it's basically just a volume tool control. Now, next I want to go over another volume thing. So this is a very essential part. It is the compressor. So Cakewalk has many different compressors. I chose the Sonatus compressor because it kind of gives a good amount of control, but it's also very, user-friendly because it has, a graph to display all of the stuff, and it just kind of gives a nice, detail. So, what a compressor does is that it is an automatic volume fader. And so what that entails is basically for a certain threshold of volume, anything above it, it will compress it to a certain volume. So if it is so for example, it's at negative 21 decibels, so anything over that, it'll compress to a lower volume. And that helps basically with kind of limiting how much volume comes through so that things like drums or bass kind of just don't clip too much, and it kind of gives a nice balance to the mix. So where the bass doesn't come in too much, but you can still hear it well. And so let me go through some of these other things. So the attack is kind of just how the tool attack, kind of just how much it, or how long it takes for it to limit the sound, basically. So if you have a sound, it'll take, in this example, 42 milliseconds for it to actually set the effect, for it to lower the volume. And the release, in this case, is how long it'll take 3,500 milliseconds for it to release the effect. And so these two kind of fader things, you can kind of just scroll these around, and you kind of want to get the best sound you want to set them to extremes. So you want to set them to like this. You don't really want to try to find the right level off the bat. So play this. And so you want to kind of just start going down until you get a nice sound that you want. And in this case, the sound that I really liked was around here for it. And the release was about here. That's kind of what I liked, because it kind of gave a nice punchy sound, but it also, it didn't, because I wanted to kind of limit, because it was already a little bit loud, so I kind of wanted to, dim it right off the bat, because if you have a longer attack, it, kind of, I mean, it's good for bass, because usually you want a shorter attack for drums, but in this case, I really wanted a nice, just right off the bat attack, because it just sounded good to me. And a lot of mixing is just kind of getting what sounds good. There's not an exact number for anything. And so that's just kind of what it sounded. Now the next thing is the ratio. So basically, ratio is if you have 9 to 1, so that would be anything. So it'll take anything that's over this by like 9 decibels or whatever. It'll lower it to 1 decibel over. So it'll quiet it, basically. And then the gain um, kind of controls like the output. So like control how much volume comes through. So if you raise it, it'll be more, and if you lower it, it'll be quieter. So yeah, that's kind of what the compressor does. It's very good. Usually you want it for bass and drums and stuff like that. Usually you use it less for guitar. You also use it for vocals, especially if the vocals are for like through a condenser mic. You know, if there's some vocals that are kind of loud, you usually want it to kind of soften it so it doesn't clip. It's very good for controlling clips, which is basically when the volume goes over a certain threshold to where it starts to distort. And so another thing I wanted to go over was, where is it? The equalizer. So the equalizer kind of controls the frequencies and how much of those frequencies come through in the mix. So as you can see in here, I wanted to kind of get rid of the higher frequencies and kind of just leave the lower frequencies kind of just, in the center because the bass already sounds good, you know. So basically what happened is why I lowered the higher frequencies all the way quiet is because I had feedback coming in from the amp and those tend to be higher. So I lowered those to kind of get rid of that. And that's kind of usually what you do when you have kind of stuff like that is usually you want to get rid of any unnecessary frequencies that you don't want, you know? And so then that's what I did. And so on this graph you can see this is the volume. So this is like quiet and this is loud, this is the decibels. And on this kind of bottom area is the frequency. So you have the low frequencies over here and you have the higher frequencies over here. And, not every software is going to have it the same display, but, kind of just like you can drag these up and down, to kind of get where you want it in the mix. So if I turn this off, you'll hear the so if I go right, you can hear that, and if I turn this on, it gives away. So it controls, like that kind of extra sound that you don't really want. And it's very good for just highlighting also certain aspects of the track or like the instrument that you have. So let me give another example. Would be these drums. So let's see. Alright, so in these drums, if I take away this equalizer, you can see how much quieter that is. Especially that snare, it's very like thin, it doesn't sound very good, but because the snare kind of is higher, kind of mid to high in the frequencies, I raised it to accentuate that snare because the bass drum was kind of already there, but you can hear it because I raised that. It comes in through a lot better. You can hear it really has a nice smack to it. And so it's very important, especially with drums. Because in my case, I didn't actually use real drums, so I used piano drums, and so um, the record. So I used a a um, dynamic mic just right on the speaker of where the piano was, and then I used a condenser mic to kind of capture the more, reverb of it. And so it doesn't have the best quality as like if you had like a real drum kit. So, you know, in this kind of situations when you have to improvise, it's very important, to really have to make sure that you kind of bring out the best qualities of what you have. So that's, in this case, the equalizer really helps with that, it really helps with bringing out the best qualities of the mix for what you have. The next thing I want to talk about is the guitar. So I've pulled it up to the chorus and just kind of want to play that. So let me get that. So as you can hear, alright, so this is the kind of chorus section, so it's kind of more, energy than the verse, obviously. But I kind of didn't want kind of too much, like, like adding a distortion effect to it because I kind of wanted it to be kind of high energy and, you can hear the guitar, but I didn't want the vocals to kind of be undermined because the vocals are kind of the centerpiece of this whole track, I would say. So let me go through kind of some of the stuff I did through here. So let me just take off all of these, just kind of let you know what it's on. So as you can see, the original guitar track is a lot quieter, partially because of just how the recording is, and also because of just kind of the volume I had it at, because originally the guitar was kind of being a little bit too loud. So I kind of lowered it a little bit for this section because it was kind of overwhelming everything else, so I lowered it a little bit. But so let me go kind of through what I put on here. So I put a boost to kind of accentuate it, but I wanted it to not be too loud. And then the next thing I wanted to do was just add an equalizer. So let me show what I did for that. So I got rid of the high-end frequencies because I had the same problem I had with the bass, where the amp was producing feedback that was, kind of producing a kind of unpleasant noise that kind of went through. And so the guitar is kind of, mid to higher frequencies, so I accentuated that, and I put lower kind of emphasis on the lower frequencies because, you kind of don't want it to overpower the bass. You kind of want it to have a nice, mid frequency boost, So that's kind of what I did for that, and that's kind of generally what you want to do is you want to accentuate the frequencies where it shines through most. And then I added some reverb. I didn't really do too much with the reverb in this. Kind of just messed around a little bit with, just kind of added some. I mean, I didn't really mess around with it too much. Just kind of just the generic sound kind of sounds good for me, It already has nice reverb to it, so I didn't really mess around with it too much. Just kind of added it just to, add some reverb. And then the compressor, again, I didn't really do too much with it. I don't have very much volume kind of cut off. I have like, it's higher up on your, and the gain is a little bit up, just kind of, and I have the ratio lower here, so um, it doesn't I just added a compressor to kind of get rid of those, because some of it was clipping, so I kind of wanted to kind of just lower it just a little bit, just kind of control some of that volume so it didn't become too much. And so, and then I added a multi-band compressor, which is a compressor where you can control the kind of how much, kind of the frequency you want to compress it at, and like kind of what comes through. So like you can go through each area of frequency, and you can kind of control what you want to highlight in the compressor. It's very useful for kind of getting specific frequencies to become quieter in the mix. It's kind of more of a detailed, it's more detailed than just your average compressor, and it definitely helps. It's kind of like combination of an equalizer and a compressor. It's very good. Um, yeah. And so to kind of add more volume to, again, the high mids, um, just to kind of give more punch to the guitar, you know. But yeah, I didn't do too much to it other than, kind of accentuate those high mids because, you know, the guitar track already sounded good. Um, like I said earlier, like if you don't, if the recording sounds good, you don't need to do too much. Obviously, the volume wasn't great, or like yeah, the volume wasn't great. So basically, just kind of raising the volume, but the quality of it sounded good. So I didn't really want to feel like it needed too much, and I didn't, I kind of wanted just that nice Gibson, which is the kind of guitar I used. It already has a great sound. It has a beautiful sound, so I kind of already just wanted that sound, and so yeah, that's kind of what I did for here. And then some other things, you'll notice these lines. So these lines are automation lines, basically automation lanes. So basically, if you turn this on, you see all these points. This basically is, so throughout the track, if you add these kind of things, it will control the volume level. So usually when kind of transitioning between stuff, you kind of want to lower the volume. You kind of want to fade out, and usually want to fade in. So to do that, you will have these little points, and you can control, as you can see, like a gradual increase of the volume to kind of get a smooth transition. Now, obviously, you can definitely control that, just by playing, but this really gives it a nice transition. So, as you can see, I click out of this. It gives a nice transition, and it cuts out the again with the feedback with the amp. It'll cut out any of that too. If you have any feedback like I did, it'll cut that out so that it doesn't come through, and it sounds like, a white noise machine in the background. So it kind of, and you'll notice that this recording sounds louder, which is something, it was weird. I don't know, maybe it was because these are two different recordings. I don't know why it sounds different. I had the same mic placement and everything. I don't know, maybe I was just playing louder, but so I had to fix that because that's another thing is like if the recordings, obviously you're not going to have continuous recordings all the time, you're gonna have to do different takes because just how things work. And so if something like that happens, you definitely want to fix that in post because then the transition is it's gonna sound weird, it's gonna sound like it's like a whole different song or just a whole different, just it throws the listener off, so And so yeah, that's kind of what I did for that. All right. So next I want to talk about the vocals. So, um, vocals, they are usually with the vocals, you don't want to touch them too much. If they're good quality vocals, especially if you do what I did and use a condenser mic. Well, I also use this for louder parts because I do get louder, but I really used this condenser mic, which you don't because of how much detail picks up, you don't really need to do too much to really bring it out more. But I did do some things, so let's look at that. So I added a equalizer, um, and I kind of just highlighted the kind of tonality of my voice. I'm a bass, so I wanted to kind of get this, you know, mid to low range, basically. For other voices, for say example like a tenor or like soprano, usually you want more mid to highs kind of accentuated because that's where that kind of falls. But usually for male voices, that are lower, you usually want the mid lows, and you usually don't really want much else kind of come bleeding through. So that's kind of what I did with that. With the reverb, again, like with some of the other things, just kind of because there's already enough reverb with the condenser mic, just kind of added it just to add a little bit, of kind of, space to the vocals. And then I added a compressor. With the compressor, I wanted a longer attack, you know. Um, it just sounded good to me. I mean, usually you add a longer attack to get a more punchier sound. Um, but I don't it just really sounded good to me. And there's like some areas where um, I definitely wanted like a higher ratio than like say like I had for some of the other stuff where I had like a 1-to-1 ratio. So I wanted a 6-to-1 ratio because there are some parts where does get pretty loud because I did use that condenser mic. So I didn't really want a lot of I wanted a more balance kind of, and my threshold is higher because I didn't want too much taken out of the vocals. So that's kind of why I have all this, but like, not too much with it. I just kind of said I wanted to sound good. Usually you do want compression on vocals, um, just to kind of get rid of if you have, you know, something it just kind of balances it out basically. And so then let me get into these. These are vocal strips. The You can do a lot with these. They have So it has delay. So kind of delay is it has uh it produces audio. Then you can set it to the time, and like the time is like the oscillation of the delay. So like you can set it to 16th notes, which is like the time of like that would be like that's how much like time would be in between each delay. So you can kind of set it to a longer delay or a shorter delay. Um, Usually you don't want delay in vocals too much because unless you're going for that kind of sound effect, it usually kind of, just doesn't sound good. Unless you're trying to get that sound, because it's gonna make it hard to hear kind of the words when it comes in through. when it's coming through. And then you've got a doubler, which basically just takes the track and it adds another layer of it. Basically just like doubles. It's just what it says. It just doubles the track. It makes it sound like there's two. Um, and it just gives a fuller sound, and you can have, you can kind of control how much of each side comes in. So it just gives a fuller sound. And I have it on these backing vocals, and it's kind of more towards. Let's see if I can find it. It's this. This is where it says record 7. I actually did use doubles or doubling. I didn't use it for any of the other vocal tracks because it wasn't the sound I was really going for, but I did use it for this um recording 7 because this is kind of like a louder part of the, it's kind of a build up, so I kind of wanted backup vocals where it kind of very large to kind of create that build up. And I actually have gotten this kind of idea because of actually Ozzy Osbourne. A lot of his vocal tracks, the way his voice sounds very large if you ever listen to Black Sabbath or his solo stuff. It was mainly in Black Sabbath where they doubled his voice, and that's how his voice. I mean, his voice is naturally very loud. I mean, if you've ever heard Black Sabbath, he's a very loud, powerful voice. But to make that even more powerful, they actually did double it in some of the tracks. And Tony Iommi also used doubling in his guitar. He did it more analog because they didn't have this kind of stuff, so that they actually did record two tracks at the same time, or they just doubled it like manually, if that makes sense. Instead of having this kind of software, but that is kind of what he did with, and he liked to do that. It's kind of his signature style. And so, yeah, and then so you got this equalizer, which you can accentuate, which part you want in this kind of thing, and that's for for this tube, which kind of gives warmth to it, so it'll accentuate like the warmth in the sound. That's kind of what this does. And you can kind of turn these different levels and different frequencies. So obviously here I accentuated the lower frequencies because I have a lower voice. And we got compressor. It's kind of a built-in compressor. And it's just, kind of smooths out anything. And then we have this de-esser, which very useful for vocals because it actually gets rid of any kind of gross sounding vowels like ch or tss, kind of that, and these kind of like higher frequency vowels that come in with vocals, and it kind of gets rid of that to kind of it just doesn't sound good, if you hear like that kind of sizzling, and then the vocals, it kind of gets rid of that. So that's good. So that's kind of what I have it for. Just kind of accentuating, kind of helps accentuate my voice. Basically, just kind of brings it out. And I have 2 on here. This one, as you can see, kind of accentuating up here, because I kind of did want some more fuzzy, because it does come with presets, which I kind of did use. But you could definitely do it manual. But yeah. Yeah, so yeah, I do have that de-esser on up here, as you can see, because I did want kind of less of that, like, and it kind of gets rid of that. But yeah, that's kind of all I really did with these vocals. I mean, you can hear how they sound.
It's a man with a heart of thunder. I
or like when it gets loud. Let me get here. This is kind of where it gets like the loudest.
Singing crimson blue, hail to the King of Icy wonder, through his veneer of ice.
Yeah, and so like this is definitely quieter than this, but like because of these these effects that I've added, it kind of balances it out, And yeah. And so some other stuff I did, let's see, let's get these backing vocals. These have let's see if I can find it. Let's see, I think it's here we go. Yeah, you can see I doubled it and I turned up the saturation, which basically kind of makes it more grainy, kind of just like more color, basically kind of like how pictures work. It's kind of like the same kind of thing. It just adds more um, to it, and you can hear that it sounds very. Because I kind of wanted that effect because it just kind of what I'm going for. I didn't really want clean vocals here because it's kind of, because it's saying black ice, and I kind of wanted it to be very dark and very just haunting is a good way to put it. And so together that sounds like this.
I'm light, light.
Yeah, so, kind of just, it just adds kind of like a haunting element to it. And that's kind of what the song is, just a very haunting feel to it. Um, yeah, so that's kind of it for the vocals, pretty much. Alright, so kind of like the final thing that I wanted to do was kind of just show some cool techniques that I kind of saw in my research. So the first thing that I saw from this producer named Dave Pensato, who did stuff with like Beyonce and stuff like that. Excuse me. He has this cool kind of reverb delay kind of effect that he likes to apply to vocals. But for this example, we're gonna use this guitar track right here. So what he likes to do is he likes to have tempo delay. So what that is it's like a delay, but it's a consistent tempo. So you can set it to like 16th notes. So like, the delay would act like kind of like, but with with delay pretty much. So what that sounds like, we can play that without the delay. Well, actually, to put that right there. Get rid of that reverb too. So you can hear that. So, and then we'll add the delay. Just kind of to highlight it a little bit more. Just kind of so. So this is kind of just this this is like the frequencies, and so you can add the delay in these different frequencies. So I want it more high. Alright, so if I want less feedback. Alright, so now you can definitely hear a difference now. And then you can probably, yeah, definitely don't want that. Alright, so yeah, you kind of just want, you can kind of just mess around with it, but the whole idea is that you have like the 16th note tempo for it. And you kind of just play around with that until you get something you like, but the whole idea is that you have a 16th note tempo for the delay. And you kind of just play around with that. And so once you have that all set, so I kind of like that. Maybe want some more. So there's not too much. Alright, now maybe a little bit less. Because now that you have that all set up, the next step is you add the reverb. And so the whole thing is with the reverb, you want a higher time delay for it, so it'll last longer, and shorter pre-delay, and you want the shape to be a lot larger, just for a nice tail, because the whole thing is you want a longer tail of reverb. So kind of just, yeah. And so we can see that. So kind of just put that right there for now. So now that we add that, so you can hear it. It sounds very ethereal. Sounds very dreamlike. And that's kind of what he kind of goes for with this kind of technique, is to get a very dreamlike sound. And so it kind of akin to like almost a Middle Eastern sound. I don't know if you can tell, kind of like a sitar almost. If you notice, it's like a Middle Eastern. It's very dreamlike, and so that's a really useful technique to kind of get like a dreamlike sound in his case, well, for vocals, but you can use it for anything, for like guitar, you know, anything that you want to sound just very ethereal. The next thing I wanted to do is something that Andrew Sheps does a lot, is he works with surround sound. And so we have this surround effect, and we'll keep this on because, so without it, obviously you just heard it. It sounds just like right there, you know, the sound's just right there. And we should turn this on. And so if you go into this, let me pull this up. So this basically, I already have it set up to a little bit of something, but basically what this does is it changes where the sound is coming from, and kind of just how the sound moves throughout. And and you can set it on a track. So you see, so this is like, right here is kind of the center, and so it goes back and forth, back and forth. And so that's kind of what the sound is doing. It's moving where the sound is. So if I play it, you can hear, so it goes from the back to the front. So it kind of adds an extra layer to that, which is the effect I'm actually going for this kind of thing, is that it goes back for almost like a boat, like you're on a sea. the waves and whatnot. That's kind of what that sounds like. You can do other stuff. Just go in these presets. You can do simple curves. You can do like this. This is a more of a circle. This isn't something I would use for this, but it would be something that you could use for like a lead guitar with, you know, like maybe like a phaser or something like that. That, you know, you could just make it sound very just atmospheric. You know, that's kind of what you want to use it for, is just atmosphere. You generally don't want to use it for like, you know, like for something like rock. You know, if it's like a nice like drums and stuff like that, you know, something that's real like angry. You know, usually you do want to use surround sound, but you don't want something like this because it'll just sound off. But like if you want something just very atmospheric, you know. Let's see if we can go to some others. Do left to right to left. Sounds very cool. I think my favorite so far is probably this first one. And you can set the time on here, so you can change that. Oops. We can change that. We can change that to. You can change the speed of it. You definitely don't want it that fast because it's gonna sound weird. But you could change it to like, you know, say like that. I kind of like this longer one. Might even have it actually longer than 4 seconds because kind of like that almost feeling that you're on a wave. So yeah, it's just kind of messing with surround sound. Very important to kind of, and then you can also do stereo. That just sounds very ethereal. And so yeah, that's kind of those are some techniques, you know, you could use. I just thought those were really interesting. Yeah, and that's pretty much all I have to say in this video. I hope you enjoy it. I'm gonna actually go ahead and play the full song for you guys, just to hear what it sounds like. So, yeah. And as the song goes through, you know, you should kind of remember exactly what it talked about, and you can hear it in it.
Sits a man with a heart of thunder. Ice spills his brain, infected with the curse of neglect and pain. Turn to Arctic rage. The sits a man upon the throne of lies. His love long gone. The and border. He sleeps only gray. Those who resist him end up futile. So listen and get it. Wintry wonderland, wintry wonderland, wintry wonderland, wintry brutalizes people's holy stairs. Just and smile, mocking those morning dead and angry seas gay evil So hail to the King of icy wonder. Hail to the King crimson blue. Hail to the King of icy wonder. Yeah.
And yeah, that's my song. Definitely would say that there's some stuff I have to work on, and through this process, I actually did actually go back of this recording process. I had to go back and actually fix some stuff because I realized there's some stuff that I didn't fix. So yeah, this process has definitely taught me a lot, and I hope that in this video that I taught you guys some stuff, and I hope you enjoy it. So thank you.